Suicide is the sixth leading cause of death in the United States. Family members left behind after the suicide of a loved one live with lifelong questions like, why didn't I see this coming? And what could I have done to prevent it? In many cases, they have to deal with guilt they cannot escape. 7 News reporter Scott Miller sat down with two women who chose to share their stories of a loved one who decided to take their own life. Scott.
It's Suicide Prevention Week. I didn't know that until Tonya contacted me on Facebook. The day she met her husband, she said it was love at first sight. A whirlwind romance followed. They were married only 7 months later and within weeks discovered she was pregnant. Wanted a big family, but she'd had a miscarriage and doctors told her to take it easy. If she could remain healthy, this would be her miracle child. The joy of pregnancy turned to shock and sorrow just a few weeks later.
He had a drinking problem and he started drinking. And we started arguing a little bit about his drinking. He told me he loved me and walked in the bedroom and I heard a gunshot. And so I got up and I went in there and I turned on the light and I found him on the floor. He died on the way to the hospital.
Nobody saw it coming, not his wife, friends, or family. She blocked out the horror and focused on her unborn child.
I had to have a healthy baby, because that's all I would have left of him.
She was alone and afraid. The loss of her husband, nearly too much to bear.
It took almost 3 years before I really started talking, dealing with it, and I had blacked out a lot from that night.
Asked for help, needed people around her that could somehow understand.
And she told me about a support group for people that's lost loved ones to suicide. And that's when I found Heartbeat.
Nancy Barnes was one of the founders of Heartbeat here in Lawton. Nancy and Tonya share a bond that few of us can really understand. Nancy's son Travis was a charmer, loved to say what you wanted to hear, but she never wanted to hear this.
When he was in the 6th grade, he stood up in the class at Hugh Bish and said he was going to kill himself.
More than 2 decades ago, most people thought those were just words. But they weren't. Travis wasn't perfect, had problems, but he seemed to have turned his life around. He was going to get married in 2 months, and then one night...
They were arguing. He said, well, this isn't over. She turned over, and next thing she heard was the gun go off.
Sheriff's deputies came to the house to tell her the bad news that her son Travis was dead. But she wanted to know more and called his fiancé.
I called her to find out what happened, and she had been afraid to call me, afraid I'd be mad at her. I said, well, did you shoot him? And she said no, and I said, well, then it's not your fault.
But Nancy couldn't help the way she felt.
And then you want to just die, and because you feel like you've screwed up everything.
Parents do that. What did I do wrong? 12 years later, the hurt still lingers.
It never goes away. It never goes away.
Tonya had a son, Thomas James Butler, named him after his dad.
From the time he was born, I showed him pictures. I told him that he had a daddy in heaven.
James took his own life, left Tonya to raise their child.
You should be here, telling him stories about when you were growing up. You should be teaching him how to ride a bike, how to go fishing, play ball, you know.
Tonya and Nancy are friends now, friends who want to help others, because nobody should have to go through the suicide of a loved one alone.